No Man's Land is a play by Harold Pinter written in 1974 and first produced and published in 1975. Its original production was at the Old Vic Theatre in London by the National Theatre on 23 April 1975, and it later transferred to Wyndham's Theatre, July 1975–January 1976, the Littleton Theatre April–May 1976, and New York's Longacre Theatre from October–December 1976. It returned to the Littleton from January–February 1977. It is a two-act play. Harold Pinter CHCBE Pinter, the 10th of October 1930 the 24th of December 2008, was a British playwright, screenwriter, director and actor. A Nobel Prize winner, Pinter was one of the most influential modern British dramatists with a writing career that spanned more than 50 years. His best-known plays include The Birthday Party 1957, The Homecoming 1964, and Betrayal 1978, each of which he adapted for the screen. His screenplay adaptations of others' works include The Servant 1963, The Go-Between 1971, The French Lieutenant's Woman 1981, The Trial 1993, and Sleuth 2007. He also directed or acted in radio, stage, television and film productions of his own and others' works. Characters of the play. Hurst, a man in his 60s. Spooner, a man in his 60s. Foster, a man in his 30s. Briggs, a man in his 40s. Hurst is an alcoholic upper-class litterateur who lives in a grand house presumed to be in Hampstead, with Foster and Briggs, respectively his purported amanuensis and manservant or apparent bodyguard who may be lovers. Spooner, a failed, down-at-heel poet, whom Hurst has picked up in a Hampstead pub, and invited home for a drink, becomes Hurst's house guest for the night, claiming to be a fellow poet, through a contest of at least partly fantastic reminiscences. He appears to have known Hurst at university and to have shared male and female acquaintances and relationships. The four characters are named after cricket players. It has been suggested that Spooner was originally inspired by the poet Eddie Linden, whom Pinter knew. Summary. Act 1. In the 1970s, Hurst, an aging man of means, begins a night of heavy drinking in his drawing room with an anonymous peer whom he only just met at a pub. Hurst's talkative and somewhat disheveled guest, calling himself a poet, long-windedly explains how he is penetratingly perceptive, until he finally introduces himself as Spooner. The pair becomes increasingly intoxicated, Hurst remaining quiet as Spooner rambles on, culminating in his taunting Hurst's masculinity and wife. Suddenly, Hurst rises and throws his glass, merely commenting, "No man's land, does not move, or change, or grow old, remains, forever." Icy, silent, before collapsing twice and crawling out of the room. Two domestic employees of Hurst's, younger men named Foster and Briggs, enter, talk aimlessly, and question Spooner, who now becomes the soft-spoken man in the room. Eventually, Hurst re-enters and struggles to remember a recent dream. All are now drinking, and Hurst mentions an album of photographs he keeps, commenting on the appearances of the people in the album. He does not seem to remember Spooner's identity, insisting that his true friends are kept safely in the album. Becoming less and less coherent, Hurst continues to ponder his dream, involving someone drowning, when Spooner abruptly says that he was the one drowning in the dream. Hurst drunkenly collapses again and Spooner now rushes into Hurst's aid, brushing away the two younger men and claiming to be Hurst's true friend. The younger pair becomes defensive and accusatory, asserting their obligation to protect Hurst against men of evil. Briggs helps Hurst out of the room, and Foster concludes to Spooner, "Listen. You know what it's like when you're in a room with the light on and then suddenly the light goes out. I'll show you. It's like this." He flicks off the lights, causing a blackout. Act 2. Alone the next morning, Spooner stands from his chair and attempts to leave, but the door is locked. Briggs, Hurst's manservant, soon enters. He delivers food and champagne, ignores Spooner's queries about the locked door, and calls the other men poets. Hurst himself then bursts in, delighted to see Spooner, whom he strangely mistakes for, or pretends is, an old friend. He speaks as though he and Spooner were Oxbridge classmates in the 1930s, and the two bizarrely discuss scandalous romantic encounters they had with the same women, leading to a series of increasingly questionable reminiscences and ending with Spooner directly accusing Hurst of having an affair with his wife. Hearst separately launches into a rant about once-known faces in his photo album, and all form an air soon present once more, drinking champagne. An odd dynamic emerges where Spooner first pities the younger men's employment but then ends up requesting employment from Hearst himself. After all this, Hearst merely replies, "Let's change the subject for the last time," which he instantly regrets, since this is taken to mean that Hearst will be unable to change the subject ever again. He thinks back to his youth, when he mistakenly thought he saw a drowned body in a lake. Spooner now comments, "No. You are in no man's land. Which never moves, which never changes, which never grows older, but which remains forever, icy and silent." Hearst responds, "I'll drink to that," and the lights fade slowly to black. In reviewing the London premiere, on the 24th of April 1975, Michael Billington, of The Guardian, observes that the play is about precisely what its title suggests. The sense of being caught in some mysterious limbo between life and death, between a world of brute reality and one of fluid uncertainty. The play is a masterly summation of all the themes that have long obsessed Pinter: the fallibility of memory, the coexistence in one man of brute strength and sensitivity, the ultimate unknowability of women, the notion that all human contact is a battle between who and whom. It is in no sense a dry, mannerist work but a living, theatrical experience full of rich comedy in which one speech constantly undercuts another. Over a decade after having written the life and work of Harold Pinter, London, Faber, 1996, the first edition of his authorized biography of Pinter, Billington discusses his critical perspective on the play in his videotaped discussion for Pinter at the BBC, broadcast on BBC4 television from the 26th of October through the 9th of November 2002. After admitting that No Man's Land is a haunting weird play, that he himself can never fully understand who can, but it works on you, he reviews the genesis of the play's first line, "as it is," which came to Pinter in a taxicab while riding home from dinner out alone, and the thematic significance of the titular metaphorical phrase "no man's land," and finds something of Pinter in both of the main characters, each one a writer whom Pinter may have to some degree feared becoming. One, with all the trappings of success but who is inured by fame, wealth, comfort; Hearst the other, the struggling, marginal, the pin-striped writer, who does not make it. Spooner, though when Billington put his theory to Pinter, Pinter said jokingly, "Well, yes, maybe, but I've never had two manservants named Foster and Briggs." In another feature on Gould's 2008 revival, following the responses of three Pinter virgins, who did not understand or enjoy it: Matilda Eager Cooper, urban music journalist, obscure and exhausting; David Knott, political lobbyist, don't expect to feel uplifted; and Susie Rushton, editor and columnist. Where's the joke? The Independent's critic, Paul Taylor, reiterates his praise of No Man's Land, concluding, "Like many classic Pinter plays, No Man's Land is about the reaction to an intruder who threatens the status quo ante." The subtlety that gradually emerges in this play, though, is that Spooner, the seedy Prufrockian failed poet, is the alter ego of his host, the moneyed litterateur, Hearst, and that his predatory intrusion also represents an abortive attempt to reconnect Hearst to life and to his creativity and to save him from the bitter stalemate of old age. Mysterious, bleakly beautiful and very funny, No Man's Land demonstrates that though it may take a little while to latch on to the laws of Pinterland, it is well worth the effort. What is less clear is the purpose of the play's undercurrent of homosexuality. In the opening scene there are repeated references to scopophilia, and Spooner asks Hearst if he often hangs around Hampstead Heath and the pub Jack Straw's Castle, both notorious for homosexual activity in the 1960s and 70s. Most analysts have tended to ignore this subtext, but it is there. With this and lines with double meaning like, "You had a cottage," as well as oblique but explicit references to baleful mothers, quaint little perversions, women, especially in Siam or Bali, Lord Lancer, a man called Bunty, and male virginity, it seems likely that Pinter is playing a joke of some kind on more naive critics and admirers.